Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's show, we're going to get into some of the developments going on in spring training, including the hot performances by Kyle Stowers and Colton Cowser, who are making the Orioles outfield situation just a little bit more interesting as we approach opening day. We're also going to talk about the pitching staff and how that could shake out between now and opening day on March 28th. But first, we're going to start off this episode, as we always like to, by welcoming a new member of our Patreon community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, we got a new patron this week. It's Kyle Goss. I would assume that's how it's pronounced. Signed up at the AA level, gets the patron access on the Discord. And yeah, happy to have him. If you're interested as well, join up. Check out the benefits on Patreon. Link in the show notes.
And as a reminder, we are approaching the minor league season, which will mean we're going to be resuming bonus daily coverage for our Patreon community here in a few weeks. You're not going to want to miss that. In the meantime, though, we still have plenty to talk about, and that's what we're going to focus on tonight. Coming into spring training, the Orioles' position player corps seemed largely set with a few question marks. One of them being, would Jackson Holliday make the opening day roster? So far, that looks to be a resounding yes. And the other was how they would build out the rest of their outfield beyond the starting three of Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, and Anthony Santander. Heston Kjerstad, who had a cup of coffee with the team late last year, came into camp seemingly with an inside track for that last spot. And Kjerstad has not had a bad spring, but Colton Cowser and Kyle Stowers have been just a little bit better. Stowers, who has so far had 26 at-bats in camp, has belted 3 homers while posting a 911 OPS. Cowser, meanwhile, has smacked 4 home runs while hitting 478 with an OPS of over 1,500 in 29 at-bats. Of course, it's spring training. It's a small sample size. Different levels of competition you're going to see from a major league game, but still, both of these players are doing what they have to do to make the case for an opening day roster spot. Nick, I will start with you. This situation has gotten a lot more interesting here in the last few weeks. What has your reaction been to Stowers and Cowser's performances so far?
I mean, Kyle Stowers' performance pretty much speaks for itself. Like, he's tied for the league lead in home runs, and they haven't been like. I know we haven't been able to see a ton of games this spring, or even getting a lot of games on Statcast, but those home runs, for the most part, at least, haven't been those spring win-aided home runs. Like, those are high quality, 105 mile per hour home runs in the Statcast games. These are balls that are home runs in 20, 25 plus ballpark. So like, these are all legitimate home runs, which is good to see. I just think that sneaky power that we've been talking about for a while, that sneaky power that, John Mioli's come on the show a couple of times over the last year and has said, the Orioles think there's a lot more power in Cowser's bat and they're trying to get more out of that. I think we're seeing a lot more of that this spring, and that power is not so sneaky anymore this year. And he's also doing it. I've talked about this before, like usually every spring training, and I still don't know like how great this metric is or like what exactly to think of it. But Baseball Reference, the opponent quality metric, you go on a player's page, and right there at the top, they got the spring stat line. And the last column is opponent quality, and it's like 0 to 10, 10 being MLB caliber pitching. I think 8 is AAA pitching. And Cowser's up there. I think Cowser's like 7 point something, but it's one of the better ones on the team. So he's facing some pretty quality competition this spring too. He's not doing it against, AA arms. So I think that's pretty awesome to see. But Stowers is the interesting one that I don't know how you guys feel about Stowers. I don't think my opinion of Kyle Stowers has changed much, even with this spring performance. I think it's the same as last year. Like, I think he's good quality depth, and I think that's okay. Like, there is this middle ground between prospects like Gunnar Henderson becoming Gunnar Henderson and then prospects just completely falling out of baseball. Stowers is this lefty bat that you can bring off the bench. He's got the game-changing power, higher odds that he probably strikes out, but still impressive power that he can change a game. And I think it's okay that he's just a depth piece. And he's been around long enough that I think we kind of know who he is at this point. I know some people probably say he never got a fair shake at, full regular playing time in the big leagues, and there may be more there. Maybe, but I just think he's a really quality depth role player on this team. If he's on like Oakland or the White Sox or the Nationals, he's an everyday player. But with the Orioles, I think it's just good quality depth. But I will say this, watching him this spring, in what little I've watched of him, he's got an OPS over 900. Like the strikeout to walk ratio is 8-1, which isn't great, but that's who he is. And the big thing that's sticking out with me with Stowers is like he looks more controlled in the box. Like he had that corkscrew swing, like literally screwing himself into the ground almost, kind of flailing around in there sometimes, selling up for that power almost. I think he's toned that down a lot this spring. So he does look better in the box. I'm glad he's doing this, but I don't think my opinion's changed of him much this spring.
Yeah, I agree. My opinion on Stowers really hasn't changed at all, but it's not because I still think he's like a bad prospect, no matter how good he does. It's because I never really thought less of him, even with his struggles the last couple of years, just because he is like you said, a fringe starter on a major league team. Unfortunately, the Orioles are stacked, and there's no place for him here. But as Nick said, he's really good quality depth. I think this is just who he is. He's going to hit for power no matter what. Short sample size, obviously, spring training, but this is what he did in AAA for the past 2 years. I think this is, and that's basically what level competition he's facing against right now. So, yeah, I know one or two of them was off a lefty. That was good to see for him with his home runs because we've been trying to tell Brandon Hyde that he can hit lefties the whole time, and maybe he has to see it to believe it. But yeah, Stowers, again, I don't think he's making the team, barring unforeseen injury the last couple of weeks here, but love that for his own sake, for his confidence, for other teams, if they're interested in seeing what he can do. I'm glad that he's performing well and he can go down to AAA to start the year feeling really good and waiting for an opportunity to arise for him. Kowser's just a man on a mission. I think, again, it's spring training. It's short sample size. The numbers aren't all that meaningful, but numbers aside, just after the way he looked tentative in his major league debut, and the results were poor, obviously, but he went back down to AAA, worked on a couple things, put up some decent numbers when he went back down there. What you wanted to see, at least for me, with Kowser coming into spring, was just a little confidence. You wanted to see him believe in himself and be aggressive with pitches in the zone, be a little more aggressive with pitches that are in the strike zone, kind of like Gunnar did after his slow start. And I think that's exactly what's happening. So I think he's still drawing a bunch of walks, but he's being more aggressive. He's batting well over 400, hitting for power, hitting for average. Obviously, like Nick said, we haven't been able to see most of the action, but between the StatCast numbers that we do have and the games that I've been able to watch personally, I mean, this is, again, just who Kowser is, but I see more confidence. I see more aggressiveness, which with his strike zone awareness is very, very key. And yeah, I think he's unstoppable right now as far as claiming a major league opening day roster spot. And we'll see where it goes from there.
That's really the key thing, is that he's being more aggressive on pitches in the zone. And I think that that's going to be, from the Orioles' perspective, a real litmus test in figuring out when he's going to be ready for the major leagues, because Kowser is not the first prospect to have come up in the last 2 years that has had that problem. The difference is that he didn't get that opportunity because the Orioles were in the middle of a playoff chase and had a lot of options in the outfield to work through those struggles. So he ends up back at Norfolk after some struggles in the major leagues. So if he's going to show that he can be on this team from day one, that's how he's got to go about it. And for Stowers, really, for me, good for him that we're talking about him right now. Because I don't want to say he had dropped off the radar, because he hadn't. But I don't think the three of us were really giving him much of a chance to make the opening day roster, because you're looking at Kowser, you're looking at Kjerstad, you had Sam Hilliard around briefly, you still have Ryan McKenna around. So it's like there's other guys that could be ahead of Stowers, especially because we know that there are some defensive limitations with him. Yet here we are on March 12th talking about Kyle Stowers. And for me, that's a sign that maybe he's not on the opening day roster, but you can feel a lot more comfortable that if they do have to call him up from Norfolk at some point during the season, he's going to be better prepared than he has been during his prior major league stints.
Yeah. Like, wasn't he supposed to When the quote, I think it was Elias, somebody, it said at some point at the end of last year, he was like gonna get the call up, or he was in the conversations they were having about possibly bringing him back up at some point late in the year, but that's when he got like hit in the face. So I think it's just also a good sign too that like this is a guy who made real improvements too. I mean, the strikeout rate was ginormous in the lower levels of the minor leagues. We've talked about this before, how he gets it to AAA and slashes the strikeout rate and maintains the walk rate. Everything else stayed the same except strikeouts went way down, which is really cool. But then for him to like get hit in the face, and like I'm always worried about guys like Stowers and like Taylor Ward over in LA. Like, are these guys going to be able to rebound, or are they going to get the yips after this and be scared to get back in the box? I remember like we talked with Lamar Sparks, former Orioles prospect, who got hit in the face, and he said it took him 2 years or so to get over that fear, and a lot of work to get over that fear. So it's good to see Kyle Stowers like in this position, and I don't think like they necessarily need to like trade him tomorrow either. Like you can keep him on this roster, you can keep him in AAA, getting everyday at bats, to where if an injury does happen, if you do need him to come up, you've got a really quality option down there, at least a much higher quality than what we've seen in the past. These kind of veteran guys who have hung around in Norfolk. I'd much rather have a guy like Stowers come up and do some damage for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree. And especially with Kerstad being limited, I'd say to right field, at least at home in Camden Yards, first base DH. If Mullins gets hurt again, like obviously it looks like he'll be back soon from his little aggravated hamstring injury. But if he gets hurt again, or if Hayes goes down and you need someone that can play the spacious left field at Camden Yards, I think you would go to Stowers before you go to Kerstad in that case. And also just go back to Cowser for a split second. With Mullins' injury, he's been able to play a little more center field, which is good to just get him out there and try to prove that he can play that at the major league level. So, yeah, I think the defense, we saw how strong of an arm Kyle Stowers, back to him, has. I think he had one of the strongest throws 2 years ago for the Orioles, and yeah, just a super super solid player to have as like your sixth outfield option. I mean, come on.
Let's talk about Kerstad for a minute, because he was on the team at the end of the season, had that playoff roster spot, which seemed to bode well for him going into camp. And I would say at this point that Kerstad has done nothing to really change any evaluation you should have had of him coming into camp. Numbers haven't been the standout of Cowser or Stowers, but he hasn't exactly been overmatched in spring training either. Do you think right now, and I'll start with Nick here, do you think that the final outfield spots come down to Cowser and Kerstad, or is there the possibility that maybe Ryan McKenna still makes his team, or that Jorge Mateo is pressing the duty in the outfield a lot more than we expect, and now you're looking at maybe just one more spot?
I mean, do you have to ask if Ryan McGinn is making this roster? Of course he is. Is Brandon Hyde still the manager? No, like, I do think it's going to be hard for both of them, Cowser and Kerstad, to make this team as it is right now, kind of how this is planned, unless there's a move made, of course. I don't know if I see both of them making the roster. And I went into the spring thinking it was Kerstad's job to lose, just because, like, I think Zach, it was you who mentioned the other week how you kind of felt like Cowser was rushed to the big leagues last year, and the organization probably wasn't really ready for him to get that opportunity. When he did, he was kind of forced there. But Kerstad's progression seemed more natural, like it was more intentional. That's what the organization wanted. It was all on the timeline that they had kind of planned out there. And giving him a roster spot in the playoffs, I thought spoke volumes, because even if they didn't trust his defense in the playoffs, they still, I'm assuming, trusted the bat enough to use a roster spot on him. I think there are other lefty options you probably could have put on that roster if you just wanted the left-handed bat instead of a rookie. But I thought that spoke volumes. Kind of, it's his job to lose. I think at this point, like it's not like he's been bad. You're like, oh, you need to go down to AAA. But I do think like you probably want to see more out of a younger player. I know we always talk about process over results, right? But for a younger guy, I do wonder if maybe you'd much rather prefer to see like Cowser, him enter young guy enter the regular season like more like Cowser's hitting than versus Kerstad, and say, all right, do we really want you to not have maybe a great spring and try to figure out the major league level? Or do they say, hey, we're going to give this spot to Cowser. He offers more versatility on the base path defensively, as we talked about. Kerstad both with Kershad and Kowser, they're young guys. They're not finished products. They have options. You can send them down to Norfolk if you need to. It's a really great problem to have. There's just not enough at bats. There's not enough spots to go around for all the talent that's fighting for these jobs. Connor Norby, the quote today, the other day, whatever, was that Brandon Hyde who's saying, yeah, if Connor Norby's in another organization, he's like the top prospect in that organization. Like, that's how talented these guys are. So it's not an indictment on Kerstad. It's just, you've got to really step up for these really limited spots. And I don't know. I feel like he's going to need a big final 2 weeks here to kind of take that spot from Kowser if it is 1v1 right now.
Yeah, I think there is a chance for both Kowser and Kerstad to make this roster. I just think it's going to take a trade for that to happen, at least the way I see it. And I think they're also going to have to be comfortable enough for Jorge Mateo to play center field, or at least the corner outfield spot, because you got Ryan O'Hearn and Ramon Urias. So I think if you trade one of those two guys, especially O'Hearn, if they find a suitor that values them more and could get them a relief pitcher that they like a lot, something like that, then I could see Kowser filling that role. But otherwise, it's just like Nick said, Kowser is more versatile, maybe doesn't have the power that Kerstad has, maybe doesn't have quite the upside that Kerstad has with the bat, but can just do more things, more well-rounded, help the team in different ways, especially if he's not, if you're going to have him not be like every single day player, Kowser might be the guy you can rotate around more often, get into games in different ways. Kerstad, he might just have to start in AAA and be like that first bat that has to come up if needed. Between him and Mayo, if Mayo doesn't make it, I mean, God, what reinforcements do you have in AAA with Norby, Kerstad, potentially Mayo, who could still win a job as well? So, yeah, it's a good problem to have. Sucks for these young guys, but their time will come.
And it's not like an if Kerstad doesn't make the route, let's say it's Kowser and not Kerstad, and Kerstad's back in AAA, I know you're going to see the comments and people are going to come out and say this, but it is not an indictment, I think, at all about Kerstad's potential. That power, I think, is still very real. Defensively, he's better than I think what most people kind of make him out to be. He's not going to patrol left field at Camden Yards. We got that, but he can still handle right field, first base, DH. He's going to be a really good major leaguer. I don't doubt that. It's just like I said, like, it's going to be, unless there's moves made, it's like, where do you fit these guys? And we're not daydreaming anymore about, oh, Kobe Mayo's this kid in low A, or like Connor Norby's this kid in high A. Like, what could they be? Like, these guys have already proven it at the AAA level. And so I'm just glad I don't have to make the final roster card, because this is an impossible decision to make.
And we're going to focus on other aspects of the roster in just a moment. But first, we want to shout out the sponsor of tonight's show, actually a returning sponsor who rejoined us last week. And for those of you watching live right now, Bob is actually wearing one of their products. So, Bob, can you tell us a little bit about what you're wearing, where you can buy it, and what else you can buy while you're there?
Yeah, I talked about Birdland Sports on last week's Top 50 episode. Go check that out, by the way, if you haven't listened already. That was a lot of fun. But I talked about the Friends-inspired Birdland t-shirt. Went ahead and bought one that night. It would look so appetizing to my eyes that I went ahead and bought one. Feels good. Looks good. I think it's a quality shirt. And you also have some other shirts here. If you go to birdlandsports.com and you go over to the podcast tab, once you hit the shop, you can see there's what is this one? This is why on the Verge. Oh, that's a great shirt. I have one of those. I have one of these on the Verge shirts. Section 336. Yeah, that's a podcast. UPod Street. That's a podcast. Raise the Floor. That's a good podcast on the Verge. No, but you can just see there's coffee cups of On the Verge, Elite Talent Pipeline, Bird Notice podcast. So just cool film study too, getting in on the action. But nice to see the local podcasts have a place to put all their inspired clothing and apparel, and we're on there. So give it a look. It's good stuff. I have plenty of those shirts, and it's well worth the investment.
We should mention here that the Raise the Floor on the Verge shirt is actually a collector's item because it has the old dimensions of Camden Yards before the left field wall was moved back. So if you want a little piece of Orioles history and you want to promote your fandom of the show, you should check that one out. We'll go now to the rest of the roster and kind of focusing on some of the developments that have taken place here in recent weeks. Jackson Holiday just continues to perform really well. He had a grand slam against the Blue Jays on Sunday in a lefty-on-lefty matchup, a hard hit ball that went over the right field concourse in Dunedin. Kobe Mayo, meanwhile, Bob just alluded to this a minute ago, having a really, really good spring at the plate. And on top of that, showing real defensive improvements at third base. This was written about in the Baltimore Banner recently by Andy Koska. Mayo adjusted his throwing motion and is now looking much better defensively at third base. And now all of a sudden, there's a little bit less of that can he stick at third conversation going on here. So, Bob, just to spend a few minutes on these two guys, what have you seen from Holiday and Mayo this spring that has stood out to you?
I'll start with Mayo. Just, man, this kid is just constantly improving. It's like slow and steady. It's not like Basayo or some of these other guys who we've seen just take these leaps. But with Kobe, I just feel like it's just constantly doing little things to improve here and there. And when you look back as a collective from the beginning of 2023 to now, he's just so much better. He's so more complete. I noticed improvement in his defense last year, and apparently he's just continued to improve that. The new arm angle, making his giant arm more accurate, that's a good thing for sure. And from what I've heard from our patrons and supporters that have been able to see games down there, he looks really smooth and just like a fully capable third baseman right now. So that's awesome. And then his at-bats, I mean, he's got a bunch of doubles. He just destroyed that home run the other day. And we know he's got the power, but you see him going opposite field a little bit more often. I can definitely see the swing decisions being better, much more selective at the plate. Again, haven't seen a ton, but just from the little bit we've been able to see, I've noticed that. So very, very happy with his development. And like I said, I think there's a real chance he forces the issue and the Orioles see what they can get from Ramon Arias. And say, hey, we're just going to go with Mayo, Gunnar, Holiday, infield. Let's go. Let's just do it right from jump in 2024. We'll see if that happens, but I think it's at least a possibility. As far as Jackson goes, I mean, that home run, that grand slam was absurd. Was like a 95, 96 mile an hour fastball, upper end of the zone, lefty on left, just absolutely obliterated it and knew it immediately. Was cool to see a little bit of swagger from the usually just like, all business Marvin Harrison type approach from Jackson Holiday. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I have a theory because he only has one walk to 12 strikeouts this spring. Holiday, you mentioned Stowers, one walk, 8 strikeouts. And we've mentioned, or at least cows are being more aggressive on pitches in the zone. I wonder if it's like something they're preaching to the young guys, at least early on, just like, don't worry about, we know you got the swing decisions. We've been building that up. We want you to practice being more aggressive on pitches in the zone and just get your A swing off, which he certainly did off Yusei Kikuchi in that grand slam. I wonder if it's just like, be a little more free swinging here. Cause you see Kjerstad, he's had a couple of bats where it's like 3 pitches, 3 swings, 3 misses, back to the dugout. I just wonder if this is something that they're trying to do to get these guys, get their, I don't know, rust off of them coming off the off season. Maybe, they saw the way Gunnar struggled early on, being too selective in the beginning of 2023. Maybe they're like, okay, we'll learn from this and let's just have them swing as much as possible. And we'll get back to our normal approaches once the season starts. I'm not sure, but could be a theory because it's very unusual for Jackson Holiday to have only one walk at this point.
Yeah, that was a staple of his season last year. And it's not just Kjerstad and Cowser or Kjerstad and Stowers, but Jordan Westberg's got 11 strikeouts to just 1 walk, but a 953 OPS. Another guy who's got a couple home runs and playing very well. A couple other guys too. I mean, other than Ramon Arias, who's just got 3 walks to 1 strikeout. But yeah, the young guys are all, the high strikeouts, low walks. And for some of these guys, like with Holiday, that's not the norm for them. So I don't know. I like that theory, but yeah, with Jackson Holiday, it's like, I've seen enough. For the kid is also ripped. Watching that game the other day, like you see the veins popping out, like dad's genes are starting to shine through this kid. He did not look like that a year and a half ago. The kid is jacked now. He pimped a grand slam off Yusei Kikuchi. Like this, you're run. I tweeted it the other day. Congrats, you're running down the orange carpet on opening day. Like, go ahead, get that practice in. Don't trip because it's going to be a memorable day. He's running down that carpet. It was Jeff Passan's tweet here. 0-2, 95 mile per hour, top of the zone fastball from a big leaguer who had a 3.86 ERA last year. And that's a 32-year-old veteran coming off a career year. Like, that's what else more do you need to see? Like, and then he comes out the next day and has the swinging bunt single down the third base line, steals third base, drives another single up the middle. Like, he's showing you the small things defensively. He's hitting the big home runs off veteran starters against divisional rivals. Like, he's on the roster. I don't see how you can put him back down to AAA. With Mayo, the kid's evolving, and that's scary as hell. Like, that's he's got, well, now actually he now has, because today's game, he's now tied with Tyler Nevin for the most at bats on the team this spring, and he has a 313 average, 421 on base percentage, 984 OPS, 5 walks to 7 strikeouts, which is really good to see. WRC plus, like, it was 171. I don't know what it is now after today's game, but walk rate over 13%, strikeout rate just at like 16% or so. Like, those are huge numbers from this guy. You got the piece you mentioned, Andy Kosker, writing about the developments defensively. If he can quiet the doubters, the defensive doubters, while at the same time, like, the home run was fun. He hit that nuke out of the stadium. That's really fun. But my favorite at bat was that one that Bob just referenced. My favorite at bat that I've seen this spring, we haven't gotten to see a whole lot from Kobe this spring, but my favorite one was that, I don't know if it was 2 strikes or not. I think it was 2 strikes
Chris
on him.
Sale?
And he was that off Chris Sale too? It was off Chris
The
Sale.
backdoor slider just lines it right down the right field line. Yeah, 1-2 count,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, you shoot it the other way. And I feel like he's just getting this heavy dose of, like, breaking stuff from the outer part of the plate. And he's not chasing it. He's not striking out. He's walking more. He's holding off. And he's getting that pitch. I love that 2 strike against a veteran lefty there. Shoot it the other way, drives in 2 runs. Like, there's still this gap between, a noticeable gap, I think, between who Kobe Mayo is now and what his ceiling is. And like you said, he continues to evolve, and it's the small things, but they add up in a major way. Like, last year he really improved hitting breaking balls. The numbers against breaking balls were astronomical last year compared to what he did his first year. Small things like that keep adding up. So I don't know if I want him on the major league roster opening day. Of course, we all do. Will the Orioles put him there? I don't know. I don't know if they'll put Mayo and Holiday and Cowser. I have a hard time seeing that, especially with Ramon Arias playing as well as he is. And they're going to keep Jorge Mateo around at least for a little bit.
Come on,
But
Daddy
man.
Rubenstein's right around the corner. Let's just do this.
I know. I want it. I just have a really hard time seeing the organization do it. But man, he's going to be ready. You put him back down in AAA for a month or two, whatever, and he forces the Orioles' hand where they leave no option, but they've got to bring him up. He's going to be up sooner rather than later, and he's going to be doing this at the major league level. So Kobe Mayo is arriving, and it's a lot of fun to see.
At the absolute worst, Mayo has put himself in that category that Jordan Westberg played his way into at the end of spring last year, which was, you're not going to make the opening day roster, but you go down to AAA and you work on these handful of things, and you're in the major leagues within a month or two, and you're going to have regular playing time when you get there, and hopefully you're not going to have a lot of peaks and valleys along the way. It's going to stay consistent. That was what impressed me so much about Westberg last year, was that for a guy who ran hot and cold a lot in the minor leagues, he was steady all year. And I think he's been able to carry that over into spring training. And I think that for Mayo, you hope for a similar trajectory if he doesn't make the opening day roster. I just don't see it happening where him, Holiday, and Cowser are on the roster. Do I want it to happen? Yes. I just don't know that I see it happening. As for Holiday, I think that that's pretty much a done deal. I don't even see – this is not a Grayson Rodriguez thing where you want him to make the roster. You think he's going to make the roster, but he's not backing it up with the results. Holiday is backing it up with the results. And, Bob, I think there is something to your idea that maybe they are encouraging the younger guys to be a little bit more aggressive. How that carries over into the season, we'll see. But he's not going to have, 12-1 strikeout to walk ratio over the course of the year. That number is going to get better as time goes on. And if being more aggressive allows him to be successful out of the gate, then it's an approach worth encouraging.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually can see it. Cowser, Mayo, and Holiday. I do see it every night when I close my eyes on my pillow until I wake up the next morning. No, in all honesty, I could see them like just licking their chops right now. And we got to trade Ramon Arias, and we got to just make this happen, even if it's, I'll say like a 20% chance at the most. But then even if it doesn't happen, like they're going to want to get this kid Mayo up as quick as possible. Once, I guess, if he's not going to start the season on the majors on the roster, then you want to at least get that extra year, probably, as sad as it is. But I think soon after that, they're going to want to try to find a way to get him up. Maybe I am literally dreaming here right now, saying that I could see it happening, but I just want it to happen so bad.
We'll go to the last part of this episode, which is going to focus on the pitching staff. We know that the Orioles have an unexpected roster spot or two open because of the injuries to Kyle Braddis and John Means. Mike Ballman, who seemingly was on the bubble coming into spring training, might have a better chance now at getting a bullpen spot. Meanwhile, it still looks like you could have Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin, who were penciled in for the bullpen previously, now go to the rotation. So if you want to look at a few guys that are performing well, one of them is someone we talked about a few weeks ago as a possibility to earn that last roster spot, and that's Keegan Aiken. So far in 5 innings, Aiken has fanned 5 batters, posting a 0 ERA. Meanwhile, fellow left-hander Andrew Suarez has actually pitched pretty well in camp. No earned runs allowed in 6 innings of work with just 2 strikeouts along the way, but still another left-hander if the Orioles feel like they need someone to fill the role that Cole Irvin would have had he been in the bullpen. The discussion probably doesn't stop there. There are some other names we could cite. Could also get into the fact that Dylan Tate so far has looked good coming back from injury. So, Nick, I'll go with you here. What do you see happening over the final 2 weeks or so in spring training with the pitching staff, and what direction you think the Orioles ultimately take with the opening day roster?
I think they're going to surprise us, to be honest. They're not tipping their hand anything. No one's even been reassigned officially, right? Like they still got the full bodies in camp. Like I don't know how this is going to go. Just kind of looking through here. I will, first of all, let's shout out Cade Povich and Chase McDermott real quick. The 2 prospects, they're not going to make the opening day roster. Get that out of the way first. But they have combined for 13 2/3 innings this spring while allowing 1 earned run with 6 walks. They've each got 3 and 19 total strikeouts. That's amazing to see the young prospects. Justin Armbruster had a great outing as well. I think he's got 3 or 4 innings with no runs. Prospects are performing well. But as far as the major league spot is concerned, Bauman looked great in that last outing the other day. Julio Teheran, I don't see it. I think the first outing was really cool. It's a blast from the past name, but I think that last outing is what he pitched against New York, I think, the other day. I don't think that one went very well at all for him. Wanderson Charles has been fun, but 4 walks to 4 strikeouts in 4 innings. I think they're going to want to put him back in AAA, so I don't know if he's going to make it out of the gate. Nick Vespi, I think, is going to have that same role again where he is up and down, and they use that to their advantage, unfortunately, although he has looked well. 4 strikeouts, no walks in 5 innings this spring. If you guys want to talk about Albert Suarez, I guess you can. I don't know if I'm buying into that at this point. I don't know. I think it's going to be Keegan Aiken, to be honest. And I know he doesn't have a whole lot of fans, which is like fair. I wouldn't call myself a big Keegan Aiken fan myself, but like he's done nothing to show me that he doesn't deserve this spot at this point. As of March 12th, this could change. He could come out tomorrow and get lit up. But as of March 12th, like what has he done to show you that he doesn't deserve a roster spot? Like I've gone over the impressive stats, the splits and stuff from last season many times already. I'm not going to repeat them, but like 5 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts. He can give you a little bit of length. I think this organization believes he can provide value as well. He was worth almost half a win last year in just 20 innings, allowed just 2 home runs, the wall clearly helping him out a little bit there. Home runs were an issue for him before. struck out nearly a quarter of the batters he faced last year. I think he's in, to be honest.
I unfortunately could see it being Keegan Aiken, but I'm with Vivek here. I'm all aboard the Prince Albert Suarez train because, man, I know, just results aside, that fastball, it looks elite. I don't know what the Orioles did to tick that fastball up to the mid approaching high 90s, but man, does it look good. Even when he didn't pitch that great the last time out and got hit around a little bit, he was getting squeezed by the ump. Metrics still look good. I don't know. I'm kind of all aboard. Unless you can start him in AAA and not lose him and bring him up later, that could work as well. But yeah, I could see it being Aiken. There's a lot of options here. Again, maybe could be someone that's not even in the organization at this point. Could be a waiver claim, waiver trade type thing, like we got with Danny Coulomb last year. I'm excited to see whatever they choose. It could be Tehran. It could be Kim as a long guy, especially as guys aren't built up all that, much in the beginning of the season. It's interesting though, because whoever they go with, they're going to go with for a reason. So I'm curious to see how it works out once the season starts.
Suarez, what jumps out at you is, aside from that elite fastball, he has struck out 13 batters this spring in 9 innings without giving up a walk. And it's fascinating for a guy that pitched in the KBO last year and, in fact, has not pitched in the States for several years to come out and perform as well as he has. I don't know that that's enough for him to go from a non-roster invitee who was just sort of on the roster, kind of an unknown to a lot of people a few weeks ago, to now being on the opening day roster. But if they can stash him at Norfolk, I think that it's valuable, because Norfolk's pitching staff right now, if you start to put it together, looks like it's going to be a lot of young guys. So there's your guy that has some experience that could start for you there. And then he's your depth option. He's your option in case someone does get hurt early on, or you need someone to spot start in a doubleheader. You need an extra arm. Anything that pops up, Suarez could be that guy. I do feel like right now, though, that Aiken has the edge, because some of the stuff that Nick touched on, the baseline results at the major league level weren't great last year, but there's signs that indicate if it had not been for the back injury, maybe he turns it around. And at least early on, he can give you innings that are valuable. Doesn't mean you have to commit to him for the whole season, but to have him possibly be able to come out of the bullpen over the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season and pitch 2 or 3 innings of relief is valuable. And even if the results aren't always exactly where you want them to be, just being able to fill those innings will help the Orioles out.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Aiken for a number of different reasons, but I do have a soft spot for him just because he entered the organization as I really started to get into like the whole prospect game. I've met him a couple of times when he was pitching in Frederick, had a couple of conversations with him. But like, results on the field are obviously what's most important here, but they're working. Like, he is pitching fairly well. He is a guy who has proven it at the major league level. I do think he gets the initial bump there. Albert Suarez, I think, would be like, as much as I'm not fully bought in, I do agree that the improvements he made are amazing. His results are really good. The 13 strikeouts, no walk thing is awesome. I would love it if he could remain in the organization, but in AAA. And that scenario played out that Zach laid out. I think that would be ideal, because, and it's also just a really cool story, because this is he's 33, 34 years old. You mentioned he hasn't pitched in the States in a couple of years. And for the Orioles to target him, tell him, like, this is what we want you to do. This is what we want you to fix. Now go off and play in winter ball and go do that. And now come back in spring and see what he's doing. For him to provide any value this year at the major league level, it's something else that speaks to the pitching development in this organization is really good. And it's not just the young prospects. They can take a guy like Suarez, and even if it's just 2 months of value that you can get out of him, like, no other organization thought they could get any value out of him the last couple of years. And if the Orioles can, that's fantastic. The only other 2 names real quickly, like, when the injuries started to pile up, I did mention, like, I was more intrigued to watch Tucker Davidson and Jonathan Heasley this spring. I'm not intrigued to watch them anymore this spring, unfortunately. So I don't know if they're going to have a shot, unfortunately. But the surprises like Suarez and some other guys, maybe Tehran, like that's kind of softens the blow that those two guys are not impressing so far.
Yeah, I just feel like Suarez he seems like this year's Yanier Cano, honestly, who could just be a guy that once you see him in the regular season out of the bullpen, you're just like, wow, where did they pull this guy from? When we know exactly where, actually. As far as, Rock Kabako just texted me, don't forget about Bruce Zimmerman. He has a shot. No, I guess Wanderson Charles would be the only other one I could see. He's looked pretty good this spring. I just don't know if they're quite ready to trust the command with that new cutter still coming along. But maybe after a month or two in AAA, he could get a shot.
No love for Brian Baker, making the roster, former podcast guest.
I mean, he's got options, so I see him starting in AAA, but you never know. Just as good as Keegan Aiken, I guess.
Yeah, he's a AAA guy.
And I guess we can't just roll in Jacob Webb automatically anymore, right? He's been having a poor spring. Again, it's just results, spring training. You never know what someone's working on, but I don't know. It's tough, especially in the bullpen, because guys can come out of nowhere in a positive direction, and then guys can be like, hey, what happened to him in a negative direction? So we'll see.
And sometimes that can be all in the same season. So certainly proving bullpen's volatile sometimes, but hopefully that's not the case for the Orioles this year. That does it for this episode. We're going to be back later this week with the best of the rest as we look at the players who just missed our top 50 prospects countdown list. In the meantime, you can check us out on our multitude of social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to check us out on Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com, and our Patreon community. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge.
Before we get right into this next episode, live viewers, stay with us. I did have AI generate the ad for this this half of the episode for the Birdland Sports.
Is that a warning?
Yeah.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to talk about the players who just missed our top 50 prospects countdown list. If you have not had a chance to listen to that yet, be sure to do so. That was released last week. And we gave pretty thorough reports on the players who made our list. So you're going to want to check that out. But tonight's episode is going to focus on the players who just missed our list. And in this case, the main criteria is they made at least one individual list. So in other words, Bob, Nick, or I voted for that player, but that player missed our overall top 50. So we're each going to focus on the players that we voted for that missed the top 50. And then at the end of the episode, we're going to discuss maybe those one or two players that we thought long and hard about including on our top 50s, but that ultimately fell just short. And I'm going to dive right into it here with the player that Bob had ranked 46 on his list, an infielder from the 2023 draft class that had a nice showing at Delmarva last summer. And you should have your eye on going into the season, regardless of whether or not he made our top 50.
Yeah, that would be middle infielder Jalen Vasquez. Played a little bit of shortstop, little second base. Actually felt like he didn't play third base. I thought he might have snuck in a game at third base, but 20th round pick out of North Greenville University, $30,000 signing bonus. Did not think anything of him when the draft happened, but then he was one of maybe the only infielder that they drafted, or at least one of very few. And he came out and really performed in FCL. He got in 2 games, batted 200. That's insignificant, but went up to Delmarva, got in 24 games, 93 plate appearances, and hit 267 with an 822 OPS, a 139 WRC plus, 18.3% walk rate, only a 20.4% strikeout rate, 147 ISO. He stole 5 bases in 8 attempts, 5 doubles, 3 triples, just really, really solid numbers for a guy who I had no thoughts on whatsoever. And now I'm like, he can play defense and he's at least performed with the bat, got good strikeout and walk numbers. With this hitting development, this player development that we have here in Baltimore, just feel like he should not be flying too far under our radar. And let's see what he can do now that he's going to be in Aberdeen, most likely to start the year, and see where he goes from here. But at bare minimum, really solid depth piece for the organization.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about these 20th round draft picks that the Orioles have taken since they shortened the draft to 20 rounds. But like, I mean, Trenton Craig still remains intriguing if he can put together a full healthy season. Reece Sharp was someone who I fell in love with a lot of the pitch data that I found on him right after the draft. After we were like berated for not doing a day 3 draft recap episode. Inside joke there, bad radio. Sorry about that. But I did that the next year, the day 3 draft recap, and Reece Sharp was a guy that the data was awesome. And unfortunately, it was just announced that he had Tommy John surgery, so he's out until 2025. But Jalen Vasquez is like continuing that trend here. Lefty shortstop numbers in Delmarva were good. He did pretty much what all the top draft prospects did last year. Even guys like Bradfield and Matt Corvath and those guys, they hit well in Delmarva, walked a lot, stole a couple of bases. He didn't have the 20 stolen bases like Bradfield did and everything, but he's still 17 walks and 19 strikeouts in 24 games is really good for a guy North Greenville. Is that even like JUCO, D2, D3? Sorry, Jalen, I don't even know off the top of my head. Like that's impressive for a guy like that, a small school guy, 20th round draft pick to hold his own in Delmarva. So he's an athletic left-handed hitting shortstop who showed a lot of good things in low A, and hopefully he gets up to high A this year. And let's see what he's really got at that level.
I had a chance to see Vasquez in person in Delmarva last summer, and what I'll say is that defensively he passes the eye test. And I didn't come away thinking this guy's definitely a big league shortstop, but I think he can at least move around the infield and be comfortable on both sides of the second base bag. And just to dive in a little bit more to his background, he actually started his college career at South Carolina, spent 2 seasons there, primarily in a backup role, and then transferred to North Greenville for the 2023 season. Had a good showing there and then performed pretty well in the Coastal Plain League after that. So he fits the bill of an Orioles draft pick who had an upward arrow next to his name heading into the draft, even if it was at a D2 school. Good power there, good walks to strikeout numbers, OPS of over 1,000 across 217 plate appearances. So he performed well there, and I think that there is some real athleticism to Vasquez, and he's definitely a guy that fans should not be sleeping on going into this year. I'm going to go now to the guy who was 49th on Bob's list and 50th on Nick's list. And Bob, I'll go back to you here since you had him a little bit higher on your list. Young right-handed pitcher.
Yeah, Edgar Portes, just another in a long line of really talented pitchers that came through Delmarva and have been there for a couple seasons now to go along with Davey Cruz, Moises Chase, Juan de los Santos, et cetera, et cetera. But Portes, he's like, I think he signed, was it 2019? He was one of the earlier signees, I feel like, to come into the Orioles organization. And you can see why Elias or Kobe Perez, this organization liked him. 6'2", so a big, tall, right-handed pitcher. As he adds weight, he's already, I want to say it's so hard to tell with these younger guys. I feel like he's low to mid 90s with the fastball already. You can see that tick up. Just really pitched way better than the numbers would indicate, in my opinion, last year. Got 80 innings in low A Delmarva, pitched to a 4.24 ERA, but that was also with a 3.34 and 3.35 FIP and XFIP, respectively. Struck out 106 batters over 80 innings, which is good for 31% strikeout rate and just a tick over 10% walk rate. He's still only 21 years old. So I just think there's a lot of upside here. And I think even if the numbers weren't lighting the world on fire, just watching him pitch, he seemed much more composed than he did in 2022 and just like a much better pitcher. So just want to continue to see that development and think he could be a guy that, this is the year of the pitcher, could be one of the guys that just glows up a little bit this year and breaks into our top 50 firmly in 2024.
Yeah, I was trying to find it real quick, but he actually had his fastball had one of the biggest velo gains in all of minor league baseball, I think, or at least for his age level. I can't remember which one exactly, but it was like a significant boost in fastball velo last year. He repeated Delmarva last year. That's okay because he was just 20 years old, and like you mentioned, some of the numbers there, the improvements of the strikeout rate, 31%, but that was an improvement from 18% the year before. The walk rate went down from 14% to 10%. Like that's awesome to see from a guy repeating that level. And still he's turns what, 21. Is he 21 already? I don't know. Either way, he's 21 years old still, and will be in high A, end of the year in high A. So this is a guy who I like to put guys like this on the back end of my top 50 list. Like you could put a more high floor reliever type prospect, which I did have two, and Teddy Sharkey and another guy who we'll talk about in a second. But these two guys are just so good. I had to put them on. But I like guys like Portes who, they're young, they're still very raw, they're wild cards, but they've got like one or two things they do so well. And he's a bigger guy who has worked as a starter up to this point, that if things start clicking for him, which they started to do last year in Delmarva, like he could become a legitimate pitching prospect in this organization if he takes off in Aberdeen next year. So I'm excited to watch him pitch. He was a guy who, like, we were tracking the numbers. We saw the numbers were good last year and they were better and better as the season progressed. But he was still a guy who, when he pitched, I was just like, do I want to watch Edgar Portes tonight? I don't know. I never really sat down and watched one of his outings in depth. And I feel like I missed the boat on Portes on doing that last year with him, unfortunately. But I'm excited to see what he can do in Aberdeen, which it sucks that he's in Aberdeen now because we're not going to be able to really sit down and watch his outings in depth. We'll have to watch it from the bird's eye view, but take what we can get, I guess.
I was really, really close to having Portes on my list. Portes and another guy who I'm going to talk about towards the end of the episode fell just outside. We're really 51 and 52 for me. I love his fastball. I think his fastball is a legitimate pitch. It's getting better. It's got some nice movement to it. I think for me, I want to see how the rest of that repertoire develops and how he's able to maintain his command, which got a lot better at Delmarva down the stretch. I want to see how that carries over to Aberdeen a little bit, but I get the feeling that on my own list, the first graduation we have during the season, Portes will probably slide into my top 50. And at that point, should be, provide everything's going well for him, should be in our top 50 firmly at that point. So I'm really excited to see what he does. And Nick, we'll go back to you here because you just touched on the fact you had a reliever towards the back end of your list that you really liked.
I do. I really like this kid. Well, he's not a kid. He's like 26 years old now, but Keegan Gillies. He's going to be in the major leagues this year. I'll just say it now. Yes, he's 26, but I don't care about the age. 5 years at Tulane, missed almost all of 2022. I think he had like 2 or 3 outings and then came back at the very end of the year. So missed pretty much all of 2022 with an injury. So last year was really his first full year of pro ball, and he was immaculate. The .54 ERA in high A, 27 strikeouts to 4 walks, gets 18 games in Bowie, and the numbers not as good. 3.75 ERA, which for a reliever, like that's good. 34 strikeouts to 10 walks, but 6 of the 10 runs he gave up in Bowie came in 2 outings. So 13 of his 18 outings in Bowie went 1 to 2 innings with no earned runs allowed. Like that's dominant. I will take that. He's listed at 6'8", runs it up into the upper 90s. The splitter's a big league pitch. He might start back in Bowie, but I don't know. Depending on how Norfolk's staff shakes out and depending on how he looks in the backfields this spring, I could potentially see him starting in Norfolk's bullpen. We'll see, TBD in a couple weeks here. But I just think between like Chase McDermott, Wanderson Charles who can throw more strikes, Chase McDermott with that fastball and his repertoire he's got, and a more developed Keegan Gillies, that's 3 good examples right there of some like high octane late season bullpen additions that the Orioles could have at their disposal come, post trade deadline that could just add this whole new dynamic to the back end of games late in the year.
Yeah, love Keegan Gillies. And shout out to Locked on Orioles. Connor Newcomb had a great interview with Gillies last week. I think it was towards the end of last week. Really good insight there. smart kid. He's a big fan of Juan St. Charles as well, just like we all are. And he's 6'8", big upper 90s fastball with the splitter. Add him to the mountain range and let's go. I think he's definitely going to make his major league debut this year. And yeah, I'm excited to see it. I think him and Juan St. Charles are not that much different, honestly, other than I think Gillis is his bigger guy. But yeah, high octane stuff. And I can't wait to see how it plays in AAA and then in Baltimore.
Yeah, I think the thing for Gillis is if he goes back to Bowie is just finding the consistency that we saw towards the end of the year and being able to keep the walks down as he did at Aberdeen. You look at his strikeout to walk numbers when he was with the Ironbirds, 27 strikeouts against just 4 walks in 16 2/3 innings. The walks crept up a little bit at Bowie, but I think when you're overpowering hitters the way that Gillis does, you can live with the walks a little bit. He certainly exceeded expectations for me last year, and I'm really excited to see what he does. And I agree with both of you. If he's able to improve on what he did last year and carry that over to AAA, because we know that bump to AAA is going to happen quickly if he starts off strong at Bowie, he's going to be in the conversation for a bullpen job.
Yeah. I also like the answer he gave at the end of Connor's interview. The guy does not give the politically correct answers. When Connor asked him, you're a 10-year veteran in Major League Baseball, because he's from New Orleans, would you ever consider say like Baltimore seafood is better than New Orleans? And he was like, no, never. The crab cakes are good, but the seafood doesn't match up. I'm like, the man's given rightful, truthful answers in his heart, truthful answers. I respect it. I respect the guy even more after that interview. Just had to throw that shot in there as a non-Mailander here.
I'll go now to the 2 players that were on my personal top 50 that missed our overall top 50. And I'll start with the guy who came in 47th on my list, and that is Ryan Long. And Long, to me, is just one of those really kind of fascinating prospects that the Orioles have. A right-hander who's generally successful despite the lack of high upside velocity. What he does really well is that he's got such a broad repertoire of pitches. The fastball and the changeup are what you will probably see outing to outing be the most consistent for him. But he can also mix in a curveball, a cutter, a slider. And for a lot of people, Long came onto the scene last year when he struck out Mike Trout during the World Baseball Classic. But he managed to carry that over into a pretty solid regular season, pitched really well at Aberdeen, and took a step back at Bowie. There's no question about that. The walk numbers went in the wrong direction, had more trouble keeping the ball in the ballpark, but I think that the formula is there for him to be successful at the AA level with adjustments. And if we're going to look towards the back of our list and a guy like Cameron Weston, I think Weston's secondaries are better than Long's, but there's not that much of a gap between those 2 guys. And Long, much like Weston, to me, represents that kind of wild card where right now it looks like a reliever. He looks like a reliever, but there's a possibility if a couple of things go right for him and he really makes strides in his development, maybe he's a starter.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. If he's going to sit 95 to 97 this year, that could be the thing, because in that one spring training outing, I don't remember exactly what he touched, but I was like, whoa, didn't know he had that in him. So, yeah, if he went to tread or something and got that velocity up a tick or 2 combined with the rest of the repertoire, then, yeah, I'm going to buy in big time on Ryan Long this year. But we'll see. Even if it comes back down to like 93 to 95, that's still better than I think it was last year, and intriguing to say the least.
I think it was 97 that he touched in that game, which was impressive because I think 96 was his high going into last season. So velo continuing to tick up. Yeah, like Zach mentioned, the deep repertoire there. I know there's a lot of impressive data on a lot of those pitches. It's a matter of just him putting it all together. I almost wonder if he's a good candidate to, put him in a shorter relief role. And I wonder if that stuff will bump up even more. Could he throw 97, 98? He sit another tick higher if he's throwing just 1 inning gas. I don't know. He's already a pretty developed guy. So I don't know how much projection is there with him, but yeah, nice under the radar name. So he does in Bowie this year. And I think he's also I think he also went to law school. I want to say there was a really cool story about him like a couple years ago. Like I think he also he's going to law school on the side as he's also pitching professionally. So yeah, just another smart guy. Deep repertoire, fun arm to watch in Bowie this year. We'll see what kind of role they put him in.
He's really setting the bar high
Good one
for himself.
The other guy on my list that I think fits into a similar mold in some ways and who placed 50th. So the very last spot on my list, Daniel Lloyd. Lloyd kind of came onto my radar. Matt Blood was doing an interview with, I believe it was Jake Rill over at Orioles.com for his newsletter before last season. And seemingly went out of his way to shout out Daniel Lloyd. And I remember texting the two of you saying, Matt Blood, just plug Daniel Lloyd here. What's going on? Because you look at Lloyd's numbers in Delmarva the year before between Delmarva and Aberdeen, and they were solid, but nothing there really jumped out. And he pitched primarily out of the bullpen. Last year, he goes to Aberdeen, and while he was there the full season, he's another example of where the Orioles took a guy that had been mostly reliever and managed to make him a pretty successful starter. 3.24 ERA, 102 and 2/3 innings, struck out 108 batters in that span. And what impresses me about Lloyd is the fastball. And again, it's not so much about the velocity, but it's a really high spin, really effective pitch that has been able to keep hitters off balance to this point. We saw a broader repertoire come in as he worked in the starting rotation role. He doesn't have that sort of Alex Pham thing where he can put the fastball just about anywhere and then get hitters out with that curveball. But he can still work through a lineup efficiently, miss bats. And I think that there is some room for development here where if you could get the fastball velocity up a little bit, now you're looking at someone who could be effective in short outings, or you could try to stretch into a long relief role or possibly even a starter. But take a guy that was a reliever at South Carolina, reliever in his first full year of pro ball, and get the results that the Orioles did from him last year was really encouraging to me.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Lloyd as well. And the Matt Blood shout out goes a long way to back up his performance following that. Just says a lot that he's continuing to develop and get better, just like all these guys are. This is why this is the year of the pitcher, in my /our opinion, is just look at this long list of names that are so intriguing and with one or two steps in the right direction could become that much better as prospects onto our top 50 list, up our top 50 list and beyond. So yeah, can't wait to see what he does to follow up last year.
And this doesn't even include a lot of like high upside, I think, international arms and bats that, again, we just don't have a lot of information on. So that's going to be a lot of fun as well. But yeah, with Lloyd, I feel like I said this last year when we talked about it, but I feel like he should be 30. He's only 23, but I just feel like he's so much older than he is. But I also think he probably spent all of last year in high A because innings, like they want to get him a high volume of innings, and I don't know if they were going to be there for him in double A. Just keep him in high A, Aberdeen's rotation. He can continue on that path. So I'm curious to see, because Bowie's going to be crowded again this year, but I'm curious to see how they use him. Fastball's good, slider's good, probably a relief prospect long term, but a guy who can give you length down the road. I think I agree with Zach there that I don't think anything really pops with him, but he strikes out a ton of guys, and he's been effective for 2 straight years now. So I'm put him in Bowie, whatever role you want to, and let's see how the stuff plays with Double A this year.
And we have more guys we're going to shout out in this episode because all three of us struggle with how to put this list together. It's really challenging, and there are players that we probably deep down really wanted to include in the top 50, but at the end of the day, just couldn't find room for. And we're going to highlight those guys in the second half of this episode. But first, we want to have a shout out here from our sponsor.
Hey, Orioles fans, are you ready to show your true colors? Look no further than Birdland Sports, the ultimate fan-made t-shirt shop that's all about the birds. At Birdland Sports, we're not just fans, we're part of the flock. Our collection features unique designs inspired by the Baltimore Orioles and their star players. From classic logos to modern twists, each piece tells a story of passion and pride. Whether you're at Camden Yards or cheering from home, our tees are the perfect way to celebrate every home run and strikeout. Made by fans for fans, our gear is a home run for quality and style. Let's go, O's. Let's go, O's. So fly over to birdlandsports.com today and get your hands on the freshest Orioles apparel out there. And for our podcast listeners, use the code OriolesCast at checkout for an exclusive discount. That's not real. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Birdland Sports, where the love of the game and fashion hits a grand slam. Boo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Was that noise earlier in the ad read supposed to be a crowd cheering?
Yes.
I thought you were having your teeth cleaned at the dentist. I couldn't tell what that was.
You know, it must have been at Tampa Bay Stadium.
Yeah, real magic mind there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll go now to the rest of the players that we consider for our top 50, but ultimately fell just short of our individual list. And Bob has a pretty interesting mix here because we talked about not knowing a lot about some of the international guys, and as well as maybe having some question marks about players that have shown flashes of success at the lower levels, even if they haven't been able to put it together just yet. And Bob kind of covers that here with his three guys that he wants to shout out tonight.
Yeah, first off was a guy who's popping up in top 30 lists, which I wish we could be part of that, but we just don't have enough because he's only played in the DSL so far, and that's third baseman Joshua Lorenzo, who I have just hanging out just outside my top 50, waiting for the chance to put him in there, but I just can't justify it yet at this point. We'll see. Maybe I'll change my mind by the time our May update rolls around. We'll see, but want to see him at least get to the FCL, see what his walk strikeout numbers, if he's able to build upon the strong end that he had in the DSL. He got better as the year went on. And yeah, especially if he can make it to Delmarva and we can get eyes on him and some more information. That's one of my guys. I don't know if you guys want to chime in.
Just power. The kid was 16 years old. He was one of the youngest international signings in all of baseball last year, and has already shown the power in the DSL, like a place where you don't really see a lot of over the fence power. I like it. I think it is cool. I joke a lot that I don't really read MLB pipeline stuff. I don't really care for their top 30 lists because like Joe Trezza makes a list. I'm not that interested, but like he gets input from the Orioles front office, like from Orioles sources as well, and like it does get some input as well from guys like Jonathan. I think Jonathan Mayo who gets the Orioles list over there as well, kind of oversees it. But like to have somebody telling him like this is a top 30 kid, I think that's pretty awesome. I think hopefully he makes a lot of noise in the FCL this year.
Yeah, I agree. Lorenzo was one of those guys that we had our eye on coming out of last year's international class because he was not the top bonus guy. That was Luis Almeida, but he was in that next tier where it seemed like he could be someone that broke out in some way over the next couple of years. The power was there, the walk to strikeout numbers, which we look at a lot. Struck out, I think, a little bit more than you would like, but the walk numbers were solid. So a good base to build from for him. And I agree. I could see him really breaking out in the FCL.
And another guy who has been stuck in, I don't want to say stuck, but in Delmarva the past 2 seasons, and is just like Edgar Portis, another one of these guys that has already made improvements, and you can just see the breakout happening at some point. It's Moises Chase, great stuff, electric arm, but you got to be able to throw more strikes than balls. And I think that's what his biggest struggle has been to this point. But it did seem like it was getting better. And then I think he must have been dealing with a minor injury later in the season. I don't think he really ended as strong as the middle of the year went for him. But I like him as a strong upside arm. And I'll just go right to Trendon Craig, my other guy, another 20th round pick for the Orioles. He's struggled between injuries and inconsistency, but I think this is a make or break year for him. And I think he still has the tools to be a guy that can make our top 50 list at some point this year if everything breaks right.
Yeah, I like Craig, like I referenced earlier, just injuries. He always seems to get hurt and miss a big chunk of time, and it like lingers, but he flashes some like real power in some of the games that when you watch him play. So I just want to see him stay healthy. I actually had Chase as well. That some notes on him because I wanted to shout him out. I wanted him on my top 50. He's still just 20 years old. He doesn't turn 21 until June, but he's already got 120 innings, over 120 innings in Delmarva over the last 2 years. 2022 was okay. I think he had a couple freak injuries in there. I think one, like he slipped on the mound and missed a couple starts or whatever after that. But there was another injury, I think, as well. But repeated Delmarva as a 19, 20-year-old, lowered his ERA by half a run, like 4.5. But the strikeout rate went from 23% to 33%. The walk rate did creep up even more, though. That was like 15, 16, 17%. That's not good at all. But hitters only hit 193 against him. He's 6'1". He's getting bigger. The velo's up to like 95, 96. I think there's more in the tank. He had a really good April last year. May and June were awful. Combined ERA of like 8 in those 2 months, and he had 34 walks in those 2 months alone. But then in July, Chase pitched a season high 17 innings in the month of July last year, and he allowed 0 runs in 17 innings, 7 walks to 27 strikeouts. I don't know if it finally clicked because, like Bob said, the season ended. He had, I think, I don't know what exact injury it was, but he didn't pitch pretty much at all the final 2 months of the year. A start or two here, but he's a 20-year-old kid still who could probably be in Aberdeen's. He's going to be in Aberdeen's rotation at some point this year. And if that month of July last year was more of the real Moises Chase, then I think he's going to make a lot of noise this year. But you still got to prove that just wasn't like a 1 month fluke. But
yeah, I just wonder if he could be like a Edward Cabrera type. He's always going to walk batters, but electric arm, get the strikeouts, probably more reliever risk than you'd want. But yeah, like him.
Yeah, I think that seems like a reasonable comp. The big thing with Chase is the walks. You don't want to see him walking batters to the rate that he has at Delmarva, but at the same time, he's only 20. He doesn't turn 21 until June. He could start next year or this coming year at Delmarva and pitch there for a month or two and go to Aberdeen and still only be a 21-year-old in high A. And the strikeout numbers were excellent last year. And as Nick said, he was really good over the month of July. So if you want to look for something as a possible springboard to him being more successful last year, it's going to be the way he pitched before the injury he had that took him out of action for a little while last summer. And then as for Craig, it's really just a matter of whether or not he can stay healthy, because you can tell that the raw tools are there with him. And there's a lot more left in the tank, especially with his power. It's just that he has not had a really healthy extended run yet in 2 full seasons in pro ball. And it's tough for him because the Orioles are so deep in outfielders, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But even if he, has to DH a little bit more next year, the key is just going to be getting at bats and showing what he can do when he's in the box, because you see flashes of him being a really solid player.
I can go one more name that I had as well, and it's another pitcher. Well, Silas Ardoin, TBD on how exactly we pronounce his last name, but Silas Ardoin was a guy who I also considered as well. But like defensive catcher, he's his walk numbers again. He didn't have that outrageous walk start to his career, his pro career, and he's doing it again in spring training at the major league level this year so far. But defensive catcher, I could see him having a major league career. I think he definitely will. Questions about how much of the bat we're going to see, but I considered him as well. But another guy is another pitcher, Kyle Verbitsky. I really wanted him in my top 50. Comes over in the Cole Irvin trade, gets assigned to high A, where we thought, all right, maybe he's just going to go there for a couple of weeks and acclimate to the new organization. But his experience in high A already over in Oakland and his age, he needs to be in double A. And then he got shelled when he was in Aberdeen. His first 4 outings, he had a 12.66 ERA, a whip over 2. May got better, but then in June, he had his real breakout, a .92 ERA, an 0.81 average against, and a .56 whip in the month of June. Kind of put it in cruise control for the rest of the year. Great season for Verbitsky. He's 6'7", can run up into the mid-90s. I think he's a guy who the Orioles were just kind of fine with leaving in high A as they kind of make their tweaks to his game. Clearly, they worked at the high A level, and I'm excited to see what he can do in double A now. But
Yeah, Ardoin or Ardwin, however it's pronounced. It was interesting to see him last year because he got off to a really bad start at Aberdeen, never got comfortable at the plate, but then he had that little bit of a bump we've seen some players have at Bowie where good power numbers, the walk numbers went way up. He was getting on base more, and that was a good thing for him. So going into this year, especially since he's probably going to have a lot of opportunities to catch early on with Samuel Basayo dealing with the issue, just see the good defense behind the plate, see how he works with the pitching staff. And as long as he's a guy that can get on base with some level of consistency and isn't overmatched at the plate, I think he's going to be a big leaguer. It's just a question of can he separate himself enough to be, a glove first backup or a catcher who kind of bounces back and forth between a starting role and a reserve role versus an Austin Wins, where you always have a job because of the glove, but the bat more often than not is going to keep you down in AAA. That's going to be the real question mark with Ardoin, but he showed some signs at Bowie last year of being able to address that issue. And then for Verbitsky, I just love the trajectory that he had last year, being able to overcome that slow start. Because honestly, when Verbitsky came in, my impression of him, and granted, there's a little bit of scouting the stat line, which I shouldn't have done, was he'll pitch really well at Aberdeen. And then he'll go to Bowie and he'll struggle a little bit, but he'll at least pitch well enough you pencil him in for a roster spot towards the end of the year. He came a long way over the course of the season, and you could tell early in this, go back to April or May of last year, hitters were just sitting on his fastball. And that was forcing him to make a lot of mistakes. I think he was able to locate the fastball. I think the pitch overall got better as the season went on, and that allowed him to make better use of the rest of his repertoire. So some real adjustments along the way from him. And I feel like, with an extended run at Bowie this year, he could find some success.
Yeah, I'm trying to look because I saw him pitch twice early on. Well, early on, and then again in Aberdeen when he had like one of his first breakout games. I think I saw him June 25th when he went 6 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts. And I want to say no walks. Yeah, no walks. Early on in the season, you could tell he was working on something because the walks were up. He had 3 walks, 2 walks, 3 walks. Like he was walking a lot of batters over the first month of the season and getting hit around a lot. So clearly the Orioles were working on him with something, and it must have clicked because he just got better and better as the season went on. So yeah, I'm also a big fan of Verbitsky and Silas. Are you doing is I don't know, maybe the future backup to Adley Rutschman with Basayo, like third catcher, masher, first base DH type? I don't know. I think he's got the glove. He's got the patience at the plate, swing decisions, and we'll see if the bat can eventually get there enough to be much more than the next Maverick Hanley. But yeah, I think there's certainly something there.
So just to address the pronunciation question real quick. Silas's dad, Danny, did play in the major leagues. Couple of stints in the majors between 2000 and 2008. Actually was an Oriole briefly in 2006. According to Baseball Reference, the pronunciation is Ardois. A-R, lowercase, and then the dash, and then D-W-A-H, uppercase. Now, several spring training broadcasts have pronounced it different ways this year, but hopefully Baseball Reference is right, and we can use that as our guide going forward. I'll go with a pitcher who I actually had on a Patreon list last summer, and I came very close to putting on my top 50, and that is Zach Fruit, a 2023 draftee who had kind of as we've talked about, a little bit of an upward arrow going into the draft, and that's something you like to see for guys the Orioles select. Just give a little background on Fruit. Chosen out of Troy University, Alabama, in the 9th round of last year's draft. He had pitched really well in the MLB Draft League with Frederick the year before. The ERA was not great, but really good strikeout to walk numbers and reports of a velo spike that carried over into last season at Troy. And in fact, Joe Doyle over at Future Star Series, who's been a guest on this show before, wrote a very positive write-up on Fruit going into last year's draft, noting the stuff jump that he had and praised Fruit when he came on our show last summer. We did not get a chance to see Fruit pitch after the draft last year, so there's still a little bit of a mystery there, at least as far as we're concerned. But when you look at the data, this is the kind of guy that you like to see the Orioles take a chance on. Definite reliever stuff with a possible starters mix if he's able to round out the rest of the repertoire to go with the fastball, and a velo spike over the last couple of years that now has him throwing in the mid to upper 90s. I'm really excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, Fruit is a guy who, you watch some of his college video, you see exactly why the Orioles drafted him. He's got that overhand arm slot, so he's got the high arm slot that the Orioles always covet. I think I want to say he touched like 99 in college at one point. That's impressive as well. I don't care about the college numbers. He's another guy who was in college for 5 years. I think he was two at Eastern Michigan, one of the directional schools in Michigan. 1 year at Troy, and I think he did 2 years in JUCO. But he was a 5-year college guy. The walk rate not good in college. The ERA is not good in college. But the Orioles drafted a guy like Zach Fruit. They drafted Nestor Herman from Seattle University, who there's like no information on out there in the universe. They drafted a lot of these guys last year, these pitchers, who the college numbers are awful, but the data and their profiles fit the Orioles mold to a T, and Fruit is one of those. High octane fastball from his vertical arm slot, slider as well. He's got that to fall back on and be some powerful, like late inning arm. I'm excited to watch him pitch this year for the first time.
Yeah, it's just these guys that didn't get to pitch following the draft are always like, ooh, what are they holding back? What are we going to see when we finally see them? And especially the reports of the high velocity arm. I'm curious to see if he's going to be like put on the Keegan Gillis, Teddy Sharkey train, like just put you in the bullpen and let you throw gas and move up the ranks relatively quickly, or if they're going to try to, work with some things to potentially at least try him as a starter in the beginning of the year. But I'm super curious to see how he does, and he might end up on my top 50 list if we see him and he's starting and throwing in the upper 90s. Yeah, he could make a case very easily.
I'm going back over Joe Doyle's report here, and he notes that early in his college career, Fruit was mainly 90 to 93 with an average slider and a changeup. Then he has a fastball spike, and on top of that, the changeup seemed to make some strides, but then he added a curveball to that mix as well. So you add a fourth pitch, and kind of remains to be seen what the Orioles do, but I almost get the sense, like, is this a guy where after the first season, or maybe even over the course of this offseason, they work on a sweeper or a cutter? Because that would fit the bill of the kind of, how they would work with a pitcher like this.
There's a lot of guys. Michael Ferret, we didn't see at all. Jackson Ballmeister, obviously the top pitcher, but Nestor Herman, like I mentioned, Levi Wells. There's a lot of pitchers that some we touched on in the top 50, some who are not on the top 50, some we didn't even mention tonight that we didn't get to see at all last year, but we will in Delmarva this year. So I'm pumped, and that's only like 3 weeks away from minor league season starting. So we'll get to see him soon enough.
We are certainly looking forward to that, and we're also only about 2 weeks away from Orioles opening day. We'll have plenty of coverage for you here leading up to the start of the Major League season and the start of the minor league season. We will be back next week. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including over at Facebook, X, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And while you're browsing around the internet, check us out over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com, and become a member of our Patreon community. You can sign up for a paid membership for as little as $3 a month, have access to our Substack newsletter, as well as the patron exclusive channels in our Discord group. And at the $5 and $10 levels, have access to our bonus daily coverage, which we will be delivering all throughout the regular season. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.